fearing that he will end up on trial in the United States now that the Manning verdict has come through. And it's raised a lot of questions about the role of whistleblowers and where the law sits and the responsibilities that people have when living in a democracy. Now, earlier I spoke to Malcolm Jorgensen from the United States Studies Centre. Malcolm Jorgensen, thank you very much for joining me. When you look at the Manning verdict, what are the implications for Wikileaks and Julian Assange?
Well, it doesn't tell us a whole lot that we didn't already know about Julian Assange's situation, but it does perhaps tell us that the US government's resolve has crystallised on this issue to prosecute Assange. So Assange would most likely be prosecuted under the Espionage Act 1917, and the way that the trial was conducted with Manning was done, it seems, with in mind the elements which would be required to prosecute Assange. So the way that it was framed by the prosecutor was that Assange had been involved at all times in procuring and disseminating this information from Bradley Manning, and that he did so with some knowledge or intent that this would harm the United States, which are the elements under the Act.
So given what we've seen with the verdict in the Manning trial, setting aside the aiding the enemy where he was found not guilty, would we then likely anticipate a similar finding against Julian Assange? Would it be difficult for Assange under the Espionage Act to defend himself in this case?
Well, the United States has tried to make it as difficult as possible. A letter was sent to Assange in 2010 from the US State Department outlining the ways that leaking documents through Wikileaks had actually harmed the United States, that is, in US military operations, in endangering lives, and in the ability to conduct foreign relations generally. So the United States has certainly made it clear that there is an arguable case against Assange here.
Now, there are big questions here to be asked, not just about Assange and Manning. Edward Snowden also fits into this story now, and that is the rights of the state and the obligations that people living in those countries have to protect the right of the state to defend the people, to be able to look after its own security. What are the obligations on us, the likes of those whistleblowers as well, living in a democracy?
Well, that's right. I mean, the struggle for every system of government is to find a way to reconcile all of the different competing rights that exist within a different society. And the way that that's been reconciled in much of the West is through democratic systems. But as Churchill said, democracy is the best system there is. It's the worst system there is, other than every other system that exists. And so in this case, you can certainly point to flaws in the system, but the point is that this is the system which has been put in place that enables as many people as possible to exercise their rights and freedoms. And it means having strong institutions, an established constitutional government with particular procedures in place that allow individuals to express their rights. And so this is what's being challenged by these leakers, is this entire system. And it's unclear that the alternative way of doing this is going to better deliver these rights.
So drawing a line from what you're saying there, is it logical then that the likes of Assange and Manning, Snowden, are then putting at risk the security, the freedom, the democratic rights of the majority of people by leaking this type of information?
That's certainly one of the implications of their actions. I mean, one only needs to look at the rhetoric of Assange in launching his Australian Wikileaks party, where he says that he doesn't want to be a party of government, but rather one of checking the powers in Canberra. And for this purpose, he's going to parachute his people into the parliament, in his words. And really, he says, quote, that it'll be a check on the election. Now, the election in this country is really a way of expressing particular democratic rights. And so it's unclear whether one individual can, on their say-so, better deliver those rights.
But at what point does an individual have an obligation even to leak information if he believes it is a government or an organisation is acting against the interests of the people?
Well, there's certainly no bright line. I mean, one of the suggestions from Assange really is that there is this bright line that all information should be on the public record and the governments shouldn't have this ability to keep some information back. However, it really does matter on every case, but I think perhaps one guiding principle would be whether the government is acting in an illegal manner. And so that, for instance, is one of the ways that the case of these men, particularly Edward Snowden, is distinguished from that of the Pentagon leaks that happened in the 1970s, where there seemed to be evidence that the president was lying to Congress. Now, there's some illegality there. In this case, it's not the accusation that the government has acted illegally. And so here it really has been that the government has carried out the powers which were given to it by the people. And so, again, there's no bright line, but there are certainly circumstances where there is a role for whistleblowers.
So is there a danger, though, in leaving it up to the judgment of the individual and their own morality as to whether or not they feel that they need to leak something? Is that putting the rest of us at risk?
Well, I think that there's a strong case to be made for that. So taking the case of Bradley Manning, he made it clear in his communications that there was a sense of offence of what was happening in American foreign policy in Iraq, and that didn't resonate with his values. And on that basis, he leaked these documents. But once again, this is an individual taking a unilateral action within institutions which exist within a democratic society where a large number of people, if they choose to, can partake in these institutions and have some say in how they run. That's quite a different proposition from an individual having sole control over what government policy should be in the situation.
Would you draw a distinction between someone like Bradley Manning and someone like Julian Assange? Manning is someone with access to information who leaks it. Assange is in the business of publishing that, of broadcasting that, of promoting the release of that information, not strictly a whistleblower per se. Would you draw that distinction, and would that mean that they could be treated differently and seen differently legally and also morally?
I think there's absolutely a distinction between the two. In some ways, Bradley Manning is something of a tragic figure. He had personal problems, and there was even a suggestion that he was going to be dismissed from the army before he had access to this information for other personal reasons. And so in some ways, he was caught up in the system. But Julian Assange has deliberately cultivated this situation and in many ways sees himself as existing parallel to states. One only needs to look at the way that he's conducted himself with Edward Snowden, almost acting like a diplomatic embassy at large trying to negotiate deals with Edward Snowden. And so if you believe that the state system is this imperfect but best way that we have to protect individual freedoms, then in that sense the mission and vision of Julian Assange is contrary to that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and certainly implications for all of us way beyond the current cases that we're dealing with. But Malcolm, thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.